Hey y'all, happy Baby Friday. Oh, my sound is on, or was that one of y'all? I don't know. Okay, but welcome again to Healthcare Happenings. Happy to see everybody here on this pre-Halloween week. So we have today, Stacie Buck is back with us, my good friend and colleague. So glad to have her back with us today. She is having this time, if y'all that were on with us last time remember, I was having issues then, but this time Stacie's having just a little issue with her camera to where when she talks, it's going to delay for some reason. We tried a few things, and that's why we were, right on with our time today. And it didn't seem to quite fix it. So when Stacie's talking, maybe you'll want to listen to her, but don't stare directly at her because it's going to show that she's a little behind when she's talking. And then we also have Brad with us today too. And Brad Adams with Maverick. So we're going to be talking about AI stuff. I'm very, very excited about this topic. So thanks for coming on. How you doing, Stacie?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. So I'm actually thinking it's not a camera issue. I'm thinking it might be internet, even though I rebooted, because you just froze on me like a second ago, which tells me that maybe, and my internet's been perfect, of course, until we get ready to do that, if that's like the issue. Brad and I were in a meeting together this morning. There was nothing wrong with my camera. There was nothing wrong with my connection. Like, he's my witness. It was working perfectly fine. No, but I'm so happy to be back with you to talk about this topic and having Brad join me today.
Thanks. Well, and maybe then the internet will kind of catch up with you while we're speaking.
I hope so.
You never know. And Brad Adams is here with us. He's the VP of Sales for Maverick Medical. They are an autonomous coding platform that Stacie does some work with, and I'm so excited to be talking about this. So they look at generative AI. So he started in healthcare about 20 years ago and was in the radiology space, right, Brad?
That's correct. Yep, with RadNet.
And has then now gone across domains, including the patient experience, HCC. So he's kind of floated in to a lot of different areas. So welcome to y'all both. And I see we're starting to get some of our regular listeners in here. Lady, hi, Lady, and Haley and Barbara. So welcome everybody. Catherine Rose, hey, and Jeanette. Oh, Jeanette's one of my new friends who is getting into some healthcare consulting of her own and looking to start things. So I'm glad she joined us today. So we usually start off with me talking to the guests a little bit for the listeners to get more of an idea of who they are. Everybody, Stacie, knows you, so I'll concentrate a little bit more on Brad, but I'm going to be kind of short with it today because I know that probably everybody has a lot of questions about the AI topic, and we have a lot of things that we wanted to talk about it. So with that, Brad, with being in 20 years, so it says you started in radiology, you've done some HCC stuff, you've done some patient. So how did that journey from where you were move over into this AI space?
So about, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, I went from consulting with Press Gainage Patient Experience Company, does HCAHPS reporting and quality measures. I moved from that as I wanted to get into the healthcare tech space specifically because I have always been fascinated with technology. When I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old, my dad bought me my first computer. It was a Commodore 64, where you could just type in like hundreds of lines of code and you play a silly computer game. And so I was kind of hooked on that. So from a professional perspective, when I got the opportunity to go from Press Gainey to a healthcare startup in the health tech space, I just thought it was a good opportunity to, do something I'm passionate about, both healthcare and technology, and combine the two. And then over the last 7 years, over the last 20 years, but especially in the last 7 years, the technology space has grown exponentially in healthcare, and the capabilities of what technology can do to create better patient care, to create efficiencies. I think it's a good place to be and a good problem to solve for. So I've enjoyed the journey, and I've been in this space specifically with Maverick for a little over 8 months, and I've really enjoyed the process of learning about artificial intelligence and how we're harnessing that technology to improve, in this case, specifically medical coding.
That's neat. Is it the, I don't know about you. So for me, is it that, and again, you know, I'm old. So, you know, we didn't have I wasn't born when computers were here, you know, they kind of came along.
He just mentioned a Commodore 64. Okay. I had one too. We're all old, Betty. It's okay.
Well, I just mean, because some of our listeners, you know, they're whippersnappers. So I you know, preface that because sometimes I'll say things and people are just like, they, you know, just don't get it because they were already here when this stuff, you know, came around. But it just, like, the whole concept for AI thing, it just kind of mind blowing that the computer is doing that thinking. I mean, I remember when Terminator, which is why I called this, I'll be back for this session, you know, is my little nod to the Terminator there. So, I mean, I just never thought that those things would be true in my lifetime. So is that what the AI thing kind of is for you, Brad, that kind of pulled you into it, is like what you can actually make this thing do?
Yeah, I mean, broadly or philosophically speaking, I think it's a really amazing time to be alive because the technology has grown exponentially, and, you know, in my lifetime, and just watching this kind of curve of like, this is probably just the beginning of what we're going to be able to do to improve humanity, hopefully. And so I think it's just, it's fascinating because just we're getting so much more power out of computers to do things that, you know, we never even thought would be possible. So I think it's just, it's a really exciting space to be in. And so.
Good. Yeah. And Stacie, I'm sure you with me, you know, you were probably playing Pong, right? So as we talk about old school.
Yeah, I was.
and we thought that was like the be all end all because we could do that.
I remember I was so excited to get my Atari 2600, like back in the day. Like everybody was thrilled when they woke up Christmas morning and had like one of those. That was like the big thing everybody wanted. So yeah, so our group here, we're old school. We've like grown up with the technology. We've seen the evolution of the technology. So it's been pretty cool. Like Brad was saying, it's like, you know, you see things conceptually, you know, like in movies and how they're portrayed, but you don't necessarily know if you'll ever get to see these things in your lifetime. We've all seen the AI movies, and we're like living in that time. Like we're going to see development of this AI that was only fictionalized in the past. So that's a really cool thing to be able to see that. Outside of healthcare, I'm a little concerned, like probably some people, on what AI means, because we know how some of those movies, you know, what played out in some of those movies. Hopefully we won't go down that path. But no, I've been with Maverick for about 2.5 years working with them behind the scenes. I've been taking on more of a role with them, and I'm officially their director of coding compliance. That's something that happened recently. Still doing my own consulting as well, but spending more time working with them. So it's been a really great journey. I'm excited to be a part of the new technology.
Yeah, well, congrats on that. And before I move into asking Brad to give us a little more information on Maverick Medical, I just wanted to push this up from Lady just gave you a shout out. So I had to post it up here for you, Stacie. So she's very happy to see. Yes, her Miss Queen, Stacie.
Thank you, Lady. I should have worn my tiara today. That's what I should have put on my head.
All right. So Brad, what does Maverick Medical AI do? What are they? Who are they?
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, we're a technology company that is harnessing the power of generative AI technology and transformer technology, and we're using that to be able to automate medical coding and automate it at a very high level of automation that hasn't been attainable before due to the technology constraints, computer constraints. And we're doing it at a very high level of accuracy as well. So what that's doing is allowing organizations who are, you know, need efficiencies in their system and need, you know, to have those enabling technologies to be able to compete and to serve their patients. It allows organizations like that to, just create an efficient path for a function that, is time consuming and requires a lot of human intervention at this point. So we're a technology first company. We do partner with organizations that provide people services and other services, but we are very, very focused on getting the best technology in the hands of organizations that need it. And so that's really where we focus.
That's great. So as far as AI is concerned, and again, y'all, as y'all are listening, as we cover these different topics, go ahead and start posting questions in the chat to make sure that, we're addressing any kind of questions that y'all might have. But how, as Stacie was saying, AI is everywhere. We're hearing about it all over the place now. Chat GPT, copy AI. They're teaching teachers, how to teach to make sure people aren't using it to cheat and all this kind of stuff. And now we're seeing more articles all the time about how they're introducing it into like EHRs to help physicians and APPs write their notes. And, some of the stuff, this is like they can create a note in 2 seconds and all this kind of, I'm like, well, again, some of the stuff I kind of have compliance concerns about, but that's something different.
Betty, AI can't do any worse than some of the providers that are out there. I'm convinced of
it. So how did AI get to this space in healthcare, and how are other ways it's being utilized?
Yeah, great question. So AI is a relatively new buzzword, but AI is not new at all. In fact, it's been around since the 60s, 50s and 60s. I think the term was coined either in late 50s or early 60s, but early on it was really just used in healthcare for something simple of like creating a digital health record for a patient. And so there was a lot of experimentation around it. And it wasn't really commonly used. And then you get into the 90s and they were able to, create these algorithms to be able to diagnose or detect disease. And then once machine learning came into play, which we can talk about in more depth in a little bit, once machine learning came into play, they're able to really do more sophisticated analysis of data sets and then be able to use it for, a lot of different kind of applications, but it really was limited by the computational power that was available at that time. And so once we got into, the kind of present day, and you have, I think we've all heard of the term big data, being able to aggregate large amounts of data. And then you have the processing power, having the availabilities of GPUs versus CPUs. And once that happened, it's like, okay, we can take all of this data, we can process it and compute it at, levels that we've never been able to. So then it's a matter of, okay, how do we apply it in healthcare? And there's a lot. I think diagnostic AI has been around for a little bit. I remember computer assisted detection of mammograms, about 20 years ago. So those type of technologies are there in kind of drug discovery. They're using AI to basically simulate the trials of drug tests so that they can get, safe drugs to market faster. Automating tasks. When I go to conferences now, when we talk about revenue cycle, where medical coding sits, there's all sorts of automated processes from patient scheduling through, patient collections that are being leveraged to create a more efficient experience. They're doing some predictive analysis to be able to say, based on your specific genetic makeup, here's exactly how we would form a treatment plan that's specific to you. And so just having tremendous amounts of data and being able to, to leverage it in an applicable way that really kind of two aims, better patient care, but also, protecting organizations from losing revenue and not being able to staff their healthcare organizations effectively. It's just really been, I think that's why you're hearing the buzzwords now, because everybody's having to do a lot more with a lot less. Reimbursements aren't, necessarily going up. In fact, they're shrinking. It's harder to staff. A lot of organizations are having to even offshore, some tasks that are, that humans are doing. And it's, I think, a good time for organizations really to thoughtfully harness the power of AI and apply it in their organization where they need the most help.
Yeah, and that brings in some of those terms that we wanted to kind of discuss too. So you've got, CAC, the computer assisted coding, you have autonomous coding. Yeah, so they're throwing around things. So specifically for definition purposes for people that are watching too, to get through all those, what is autonomous coding?
Okay. Yeah. If you don't mind, I would like to back up
Sure.
just to keep some AI terms, because when you start talking about autonomous coding versus computer assisted coding, kind of understanding the terminology and where they fit in the buckets of big AI, I think will help kind of delineate, because it's really just the technology enables you to do something different. But if AI is kind of the big, bubble of the topic, so artificial intelligence, which could be a lot of different things. Under that, you get into machine learning, and that's essentially where it allows computers to learn from data. So you program to do a task, then basically they learn via algorithms, and they're able to do the task and make a decision. And they can do that in two ways. It could be supervised. So basically you say, I'm going to put this input in, and it's going to be this output, and you connect the two, and the computer does the algorithmic math to get from A to B. And that's kind of where computer assisted coding is. You got to label the data. You got to tell it that that's what it is. It uses natural language processing, which is another subset of AI that basically is able to understand, detect, and comprehend how language is used so it can make those decisions. But then you get into things like unsupervised learning, which is basically saying, I'm going to give you a ton of data, and then you're going to be able to essentially, as the computer, look at all the patterns and be able to say, oh, okay, this I know because of the patterns I see with all this data, and you have to have a lot of it. This is what I would assume is the outcome of that. And you talk about codes, like, because I have this language in a radiology report, I know that translates to this ICD-10 and this CPT code. But they talk about training the model, because when you get that data set, you still have to have human intervention to say, this is part of the work Stacie does too, to say, nope, that computer is not making the right decision, either because we gave it the wrong data or not good data, and so it's not learning the right thing. Think about if you teach your kid slang all their life and they grow up and they're using slang, they're like, who taught you how to talk? Like, my parents taught me. Like, what do you want me to do? So it's kind of like that. If you put a bunch of slang into the model, it's going to basically speak slang. So you want to make sure that the data coming in is good, and that's where it gets into kind of the deep learning aspect of things, which is really it's an even, I guess, more sophisticated subset of machine learning, because it's mimicking the neural networks in the brain, and it's actually called neural networks. And it's essentially this idea that instead of doing, tasks sequentially, you basically layer a bunch of computational tasks on top of each other, and they're all happening simultaneously. And it's able then to just at, crazy amounts of speeds, like able to code a radiology report within a second, like that kind of computational power. And if you want to think about like how neural networks translates to computers, it would be like when our brains work. If I want to get a glass of water, my brain does all the computations to get me to my kitchen to get some water. I don't have to go. My brain doesn't go, okay, get up, put one foot in front of the other, walk, turn. All of those things are happening, but they're all happening at once, and they're all happening, firing neurons, in milliseconds. So that's what they're trying and have done in artificial intelligence, to be able to do some of these tasks that before were not available or they weren't capable of doing. And one of the technologies that is newer, when you talk about like 2017, which is pretty new from a technology perspective, if you've heard of ChatGPT, and the T part of it is transformer. And so transformer technology is essentially just a newer form of computational math and data science that allows for inputs and outputs to happen at the same time. And long story short, it just makes computing more powerful and quicker and more accurate. But if you look at the G and the P of GPT, there's pre-trained, which goes back to saying you got to feed it a bunch of data to train a model. So ChatGPT had years and years and years of training before they ever released it to the public. And it's still a little wonky if you've ever used it. So it's not perfect. And then the G part of it is generative. So it's learning and adapting. So as it codes more from the medical data, it's able to just code to a higher level, and it's able to adapt to, hey, ICD-11s, I'm sure are going to come at some time, and you feed that data in, and they'll be able to understand, it will be able to understand how to code that. So it's very specific. And one of the things that we do as an organization that is very, I think, a differentiator is just getting a personalized version of a model for an organization, because every healthcare organization is different. Every region is different. From a coding perspective, you got the regional requirements, you got state Medicare, you got all these different kind of nuances within organizations. And so you can train the model to account for those specifically. And so then you get a personalized version of a coder within your organization that already has all of the data they need to code effectively. That was probably a very long-winded answer. But,
So then what would be, Stacie, when they talk about, with the CAC, that computer-aided coding technology on the coding aspect, so how is that different from autonomous coding?
So that was a good answer, Brad, by the way. I think you put it, He gave some good analogies, like the way he explained it, because it's hard to understand all of the terminology. Like I struggled until recently understanding that whole deep learning concept. And I heard something recently where it was described like the layers, and Brad touched on the layers, where each layer in that is running a different program, a different piece of the program. And then when all of them are running simultaneously, that's what makes those neural networks work together to get that output that is similar to the human brain. We could have a debate on how advanced the technology is in competing with human reasoning. Not quite there yet, but I'm amazed at the leaps and bounds I've seen in the technology just in the recent past. So, the question that always comes up is, autonomous coding and CAC, how are the two technologies different? And initially when I started talking to coders, they were equating autonomous coding to CAC, and they're actually different technologies. There is an element of NLP that sits in some AI technology, but it's not actually the same. And the main difference, one of the main differences, I'll talk about a few of them, is that autonomous coding has the ability to code with absolutely no human intervention. And CAC, we rely heavily on human intervention. That's not to say that we don't have some things going direct to bill with CAC, because we do, but that percentage has always been pretty low. I remember when I was an early adopter back in 2005, 70% can go direct to bill. Nope, we never let anything go direct to bill. And now in speaking with different providers, they're generally not above like 40 or 45%. Like that's a high end direct to bill. So this technology has the ability to take that even higher, get to the 70, 80, 85% range, which Maverick has proven that through testing that it has the ability to send 85% direct to bill, which is pretty impressive. When I first started working with them, I'm like, there's no way, absolutely no way that you can do that. And it's been done. And it's amazing to see that transformation, happen. And, another thing that's different about it, Brad touched on this a little bit about structured and unstructured data. So that's a difference where CAC relies on structure. The AI solution, that technology can actually look at unstructured data, and it just looks for those patterns that are in the data. And what I like about it is anybody who's used CAC technology, when you first implement that, you are spending a lot of time building coding rules. That is something, some people have hundreds, even thousands of coding rules if they've been using this for any extended period of time. And the question is, oh my gosh, do I have to start from scratch when I move to an autonomous coding platform? And the answer is no, you do not, because those rules are built into your historical data. And the autonomous coding platform actually will take your coding and documentation from the past, several years, do an evaluation and analysis of that. And then based on the patterns that it sees, it actually can code the reports. So I say it's like, it's already baked into the cake, like it's already there. You're not starting from scratch. So any rules that you've created over the past 10 or 15 years, it's there. It's already in the data. The pattern is there locked in the data. So the technology will learn from that. Now, with that said, there is a process that you have to go through with validation. And that's something that I work with Maverick on whenever, initially when they were developing the product, and now when they're onboarding clients, we do a validation. We take the historical data, we run it through. We do a little bit of a consultation and looking at our historical coding, see if I notice any coding errors that are might be present, help them fix those. And then we compare the model against what historically was coded, and then we work through any differences. Did the model do better than the human coder, or does the model need some retraining? And so then we can do some recoding, and you feed it more data, and then it learns from the new patterns, like in the new data. So it has the ability to adapt pretty quickly. Once you start feeding it more information, where it starts noticing the correct patterns, and then no longer will it recognize the incorrect patterns. So that's pretty neat as far as that's concerned. And it's also nice in that when the coder is working in the product and the coder is making changes, then the algorithm can actually learn from that. The platform can learn from that because they're giving feedback. Essentially, human coders, you will be training the AI technology that you're using, whatever platform that is that feedback. Anytime you're making a change to the coding, that goes into the model. And then once there are enough occurrences of that, it won't occur on one encounter. I can tell you that. It takes a repetition for it to see the pattern. And then once it gets enough of those, then it has the ability to start coding those in accordance with the changes that the human coders have been making. So it's one of those things where over the course of time, it will get better. So you can expect, maybe initially upon implementation, you may not see a high direct to bill percentage. There are a lot of reasons for that. It's mainly because there's bad data that we're getting. I've noticed that if the historical data is not quality, if coding audits hadn't been done, for example, if documentation is poor, we all know garbage in, garbage out. The same thing applies here. So if somebody thinks they can just flip a switch and it's going to get 85% direct to bill when they don't have the data quality and the coding quality there, it absolutely will not happen. And no company can fix that for you. It's something that has to be fixed. So I tell people that they should be taking those steps now and doing the auditing and looking at coding quality and looking at documentation improvement to make sure that they get the best result when they do implement this type of solution.
Good. Yeah, I think that's one of the things when people are looking at it, that they either think that, there's no way it can do what it says it does, or they're like, oh, you just turn it on and it's going to just do everything and we don't need to do anything anymore. And it's just going to do everything. Just like when we went to EHRs and they said, oh, well, these templates are the answer to everything. Definitely the garbage in, garbage out thing, it's going to follow forever. Y'all, everybody that's listening, just, that's never going to go away. But so how do y'all see that this, because most of our listeners that come in, are in the coding, they're coding professionals on that side. So how do y'all see this affecting the medical coding profession? And what ways can coding professionals get used to this, and what do they need to know to be able to, move around in this space and to maybe spur on a different track for their careers to go into, and any kind of advice or thoughts on those things?
So I think you kind of combined two questions
Yeah.
into one there. So, well, I think the first thing that I want to say is that, obviously the technology is going to transform the coding profession. There is absolutely no way around that. It's going to look a lot different than what it does now. And I know that there has been, there's fear out there about AI replacing human coders. And I can tell you personally, that is something I do not see happening anytime in the near future. I don't see a large impact coming until several years down the road. just because the technology, while it's more advanced than CAC, it still will take time to develop the technology. Now, AI, if you look at any form of AI, the exponential increase from year to year is amazing. So it will, I mean, we've had it, CAC for almost 20 years now, and it hasn't really changed for 20 years. That's not going to be the case with AI. 20 years from now, I'll be retired, so it's not going to affect me, but it probably will be able to do a lot of things. But in the near short term, I know people think, am I going to be out of a job? And I say absolutely not, because the technology is still being developed. We all know in the healthcare space, if you worked in the healthcare industry for any period of time, providers are slow to adopt new technology. There's cost that goes into that, planning that goes into it. It's slow. Brad works in sales. He's done it. He knows it's slow to close the deals, get implemented. I've worked with clients just to do auditing. It takes 2 or 3 years. I'm like, seriously, why are we wrong? So it's just, healthcare always seems to be catching up to other industries, I feel. So it's like a slower adoption there. And, I recently heard someone talking about AI and, taking over jobs for coders and coders losing jobs. And I felt like it was stoking a little bit of fear. And this person even was disparaging, some influencers out there for sharing their opinions about AI. And I didn't really like that slant or that perspective. We don't know exactly what will happen. We're all, using, our best knowledge to make educated guesses. But if you haven't worked with the technology yourself, I don't necessarily know that you're the best qualified person to make those statements. That would be like one thing, there. But anyway, that was kind of like a side thing. That I found that like very like disheartening that was out there, because again, it's going to change things. But I feel that even though the industry is going to change, I think that actually in the short term, especially, we'll see more benefit from the implementation of the new technology. I think the biggest impact on coders over the past 2 decades has been overseas outsourcing. To this day, how many times do you see posts on LinkedIn or somebody posts that they just lost their job due to overseas outsourcing? That has always been a threat to our industry. That is still number one. I feel that implementation of this technology has the ability to reduce that, because the technology can reduce the costs and it has the efficiency built into it where maybe it will stop that from occurring. Now, can I say that 100% for sure? No, but I feel if anything could stop it, this could stop it if you're trying to get the cost savings and this with the added efficiency. Because the more complex stuff, we've heard a lot of people say, oh, the simple stuff is what we push offshore. We keep the more complex stuff in-house. And so that's really what this technology does, is it's going to handle the simple stuff for you. And then the coders will focus on the more complex stuff. So I feel it will help in that area. So when people say, well, I could be out of a job within a day's notice. With outsourcing, you can be. With the technology, you'll see it coming. It's not just going to be installed overnight. So you will be able to see and learn and adapt like slowly. As far as that's concerned. I mean, let's face it, everybody thought CAC was going to replace coders.
Yes.
And
yes,
it did.
I remember that.
You actually see that the demand for coders has gone up, and now we have the AMA. A while back, they published an article that said there's a 30% shortage of medical coders. Now, I take issue with that, to a certain degree, because I'm like, can we say experienced medical coders? Because Betty, you and I know there are a ton of medical coders who are coming out of programs, have the education, and they struggle getting jobs. And so that, that's something that's like always, been there. But so I think that, it'll help with that. It'll help with staffing. It'll help with backlogs. There's just so many benefits to implementing the technology. And again, in the near short term, I don't think anybody should worry about losing a job. There are other opportunities that will arise. The roles of medical coders, will change. Rather than sitting and coding for 40 hours a week, a coder will probably start doing other tasks. You'll become an auditor, you'll become a validator, you'll be in that role. And I feel that with coding skills, because when people talk about job elimination, I'm like, will jobs be reduced in healthcare and revenue cycle? I think so. I'm not saying that there won't be any job reduction there, but I do not think it will happen to medical coders. The reason being is there are, and I don't mean to be demeaning to anybody when I'm saying this, I'm not sure if I got a mixed audience here, but there are positions in revenue cycle that I would consider lower positions as far as skill set than coders. That's kind of in training and skill set. That's what I would say. I think those are probably in more danger of being eliminated, because you can take a medical coder and you can't just give someone that knowledge, like of medical coding, the years of medical coding, and you can take the medical coder and plug them into so many different roles within the revenue cycle, where if they start consolidating positions, I think the medical coders are in a perfect position to maintain their employment because they have that knowledge that maybe some of the other more entry level positions, they don't have that. So I just see it changing. And again, people know I'm a straight shooter. I call it like it is. If I thought it was going to, cause an issue, I wouldn't be developing the technology. I can tell you that. And I would be straightforward. And I would tell people, absolutely, you need to be afraid of this. And there's no need to be afraid of it, but you do need to work on your skills. And I'll kind of wrap up that answer for now. And maybe we can come back to, some of the future plans, so we can get into some of the other topics we have. And if you have any questions, I don't know if you've been monitoring those. I don't mind taking a few of those.
Yeah. One that I saw that was interesting, Lady made a comment when it comes to coding and efficiency of tasks. So she said, when discussing AI in the context of healthcare, how can we tailor it to enhance the efficiency of coding tasks while ensuring strict HIPAA compliance?
So I'll let Brian take that one, since I've been talking for a while, because I'm sure he gets this as part of sales and HIPAA compliance. Obviously, any tool will be HIPAA compliant, but.
Yeah, I think that AI can be harnessed to be more compliant. If you take kind of the human reasoning part out of it, or the, we're all as humans, prone to mistakes. And I'm not saying AI doesn't make mistakes, but, having the AI code at such a high level of accuracy, you're going to be getting, probably the most appropriate, the most specific code for a given diagnosis. And so with that, it really is adhering to CMS guidelines. That's part of the data model as well. And so unless there's anything kind of off base about the historical data that we get, it really should adhere strictly to CMS guidelines and be fully HIPAA compliant. Obviously, protecting patient data and making sure that we have safeguards in both, our technology and, in the way that we operate as an organization is, top priority, because we are talking about sensitive patient data. So I think it's on the organizations themselves to ensure that they're, compliance vigilant, and then if you're working with the technology partner, making sure that they have, all of the safeguards in place to also ensure that the data is protected and there aren't any, privacy issues.
Yeah, an autonomous coding platform is going to be HIPAA compliant. Obviously, it should be. If it's not, then you definitely don't want to work, with that vendor. Mm-hmm. In that respect, it's the different types of AI, like ChatGPT. Don't ever put anything into ChatGPT. That is not HIPAA compliant. If you're throwing patient information into there, you don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. No, and that brings up a question that I've seen a lot on LinkedIn, and I think Terry Fletcher put something out there, and then I was playing with it once. Would you ever suggest to use ChatGPT for coding?
Absolutely not. I have played around with it just to see what it would do. And it's kind of funny what it'll come up with. ChatGPT, there's always like a certain timeline, the cutoff of the data that it pulls from. So that's a big challenge with like medical coding right there. But there's so much complexity to it. When I've tried to do it, it may hit like a CPT code on something simple. When it's picking diagnosis codes, it will give you a whole list. It's even giving you ICD-9 codes. It's just looking at this large body of data, and it doesn't really know how to analyze it and pick the codes. Now, what I like to do with it, and it actually does pretty well, is if I want an example of a particular type of procedure, I can tell ChatGPT to generate a report for procedure. Like recently, I told it to generate a report for a duplex scan. And I looked at this, I'm like, this documents exactly the way every doctor should be documenting, and they don't. It's like complete. I love this. So, in that respect, the generative component of it, where you're telling it exactly what to do, if it has the data, it can pull that together. I even tried it for an embolization with interventional radiology, and I got to say, it came up with a really good example. The only thing is there were some blanks where it said fill in findings, like that, where it didn't give you the findings, but it gave you the procedure steps, and it read just like the operative report should. And I was like, wow, this is pretty good, because sometimes if you're, Betty, when you do training, you can't find an example of something. So now I'll jump over to ChatGPT and say, hey, and I'll see what it gives me. And sometimes it gives me something I can work with, and then other times it doesn't. But as far as like actually coding something, no, it's not. In autonomous coding platforms, it's not ChatGPT. It's a much, much, much more advanced form of the technology. The two aren't even in the same ballpark, not even close. And I know people think that. I'm like, it's not ChatGPT.
The data cutoff was, I think it was like 2022 or 2021. So you're right. If you're trying to get the most up-to-date guidelines and coding practices, you're not going to get it in ChatGPT. But I think it did bring up a good point, Stacie, and it loops back to what you were talking about, how it's going to impact medical coding. The way that generative AI works, it works on feedback, right? Like, so if you do get garbage, then you have to basically give it feedback and say, nope, that's not correct, blah, blah, blah. And then, so it's a constant kind of feedback loop. And I think that's where, the medical coding profession, I have not had a single use case of an organization who's saying, hey, we want the technology so that we can get rid of our coding staff. It's more of like, I've got 2 retiring. I'm going to be acquiring 3 new sites that are offshoring their coders. Wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to worry about, finding an experienced medical coder at this point, and I could, scale and grow my business? So, and with our user interface, that is part of our technology. It's an auditing user interface. And Stacie has worked in this a lot. I mean, the whole point is to basically monitor what the AI is doing. And if it's not coding something correctly, correcting it, putting it back through the system so that it's learning, and then it's just getting better over time. And that's the generative part of it, as it just continues to learn and be able to, create accurate coding outcomes over time that, you would not think would be possible with, just with technology at this point. So
cool. Now, I see Sonal has put up a question that has some compliance, because Sonal, she's our compliance friend. Hey, Sonal, glad you joined us. And it leads me kind of into that. So what do they need if they're getting ready to implement, what kind of things? Because she asked about the generative AI compliance checkpoints, if there are any that are utilized. So, along that, and then expanded lines, if somebody's wanting to implement this, do you have like checklists of certain things that you go through with them?
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question. Brad, can you speak to that one?
No, I was wondering, because I mean, from an implementation perspective, I think, a partnership with an organization and a technology vendor, like there has to be an agreement on what, how are we defining compliance within the technology, within the coding guidelines, within so I think there's a lot to compliance. And so I guess, I would probably need more specificity on that, like compliance checkpoints in what sense.
Yeah, okay. I don't think she was asking about coding compliance, because she said not for CAC or machine learning. So I didn't know if that was mixed into it or not.
Okay. And then we have one about ICD-10 from Donna, about how it's how AI is ensuring that the correct ICD-10 codes are selected alongside the required supporting state and federal guidelines.
Yeah, so that is going to tie into what I was talking about, learning from your historical data. So if you have been coding in accordance with all of those guidelines all along, which you should be, and you've been monitoring your own coding, then the model is going to learn from those codes that were assigned to those encounters in the past. And then anytime there are any updates, we always monitor for any updates. Obviously, we just had a change for, ICD-10 codes coming October 1st. So on the back end, me and one of the other coders that was working with me, we were doing some recoding and retraining and the back end. So then that way we could roll that out to the clients on October 1st. So that's something that we were doing behind the scenes. So when that date switched, then we saw that the model was actually coding. We got great feedback from the client. Yep, looking good. Coding's pretty accurate. So we did that training to facilitate that change on October because there wasn't any historical data coded with that. So somebody has to do it. So that's something that we're constantly working on and monitoring all of the coding changes and then doing any recoding and retraining of the model based on those coding changes. And then each client, they can also have their own specific guidelines that they want to implement. Like one thing that I do is I work with new clients and ask them, do you have any coding guidelines? Do you have any coding policies? Are there specific ways that you want certain things coded? And then we can make sure that we have that built into the model because it pulls from like all the data. So it's kind of like when you move from client to client, you're kind of starting with a baseline and pulling from all this data because most of it's the same from client to client, but then you have the ability to like personalize what you're doing for some of your own special requirements that maybe you have as a provider and that somebody else doesn't have. Like California has crazy things sometimes for billing. If anybody's worked with, coding and billing in California, for example. So it has the ability to also do that as well. So I spend a lot of time doing a lot of fact finding and questioning of the clients to see if there's anything unique about what they're doing that we need to be aware of to make sure that the model is trained appropriately.
Cool. And then Don, I had a follow-up question about like a template, and I think that came from your comments about how it was learning and things like that. So is there going to be something like a general template when you go in and start this being used by all parties, and then the AI system kind of takes over from there and expands upon it? And then asking if there's like some kind of a general template, is the CMS or AMA, has there been any kind of interaction with them on these things?
So there is no template. There is no template. When clients come to us, we work with exactly whatever documentation they have. Now, I am a strong proponent of structured reporting for diagnostic radiology. I am, because it makes life easier in so many different ways. I am surprised that we have not seen any efforts to make that happen because Betty, that could serve for so many benefits, but that is like one of the things with this technology over CAC is it takes that unstructured data and it has the ability to read the unstructured data and learn from that and then assign the code. So there is no template. If you have a good template, it makes it easier for the model to learn. If it's segmented very clearly, it makes it easier, but there's no pre-qualification for any type of template.
Okay.
And I would tag on to that. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and maybe we will touch on this, but I think organizations and this is what I've kind of seen as the barrier obstacle to deploying technology like this anywhere really is having standard documentation practices. Where is the data? Where is it coming from? Is it all, available for the AI to use to code? Because then you're just running into the same problem you do now with human coding. It's like, oh, I don't have this I need from the doctor. I've got to go back to the doctor, and doctor's going to take, a week. It's the same thing. And so kind of the upstream documentation improvement efforts have to precede deploying technology like this. And again, I'll go back to what I think the medical coding profession evolution is like. Medical coders would be perfect to be upstream and be, figuring out ways to fix these documentation issues because they know the impact, from a coding perspective. And so I think that's another avenue for someone who, would want to flex their skill set in just a different part of the workflow. But we see a lot of organizations like, oh yeah, we don't know why we're not getting the patient order, entered at the time of the visit. No, we're okay. So yeah, that kind of stuff.
I'm like, how hard is it to take the signs and symptoms from a test order and put it on the radiology report? I don't understand this.
Those are the forever burning questions we have, right, Stacie, when we're looking at things. Yeah. And then I think Natalie has a good question that kind of leads into where you're thinking about coders, how they can work them, coding professionals. That she's assuming, as we've all been talking about this, that AI is only as good and accurate as the documentation and a medical record. So how would it work if certain documentation elements are missing? This is all very interesting. So it's the garbage in, garbage out, where it's not going to give you what you need out if it's not having all those documentation elements, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have that now with clients that we work with. There are just some cases where you do not have all the information in the report. So what the model does when it's processing reports is it actually is like, looking at the information in that report, and it has a confidence level. It has like a score, let's call it that, a confidence score as to whether or not it is coded completely and accurately. And at a certain level, that's something that would be marked direct to bill. If there's a report that's missing information, and I'll use the radiology example because that's what we're dealing with, all the time. If you have an MRI that was done with contrast, and it says it was done with contrast, but the contrast material itself isn't documented in the report, it will stop that. That will actually go to a queue for a human coder to review that, to then go and get that information. So that's the type of thing that would be moved to a coder. If there's any conflict in the documentation, missing documentation, that will be routed to a coder. It also will look at your NCD, LCD edits and flag those. Those will go to a human coder to review. Your NCCI edits, anything that hits an edit will go to a human coder for review. So those are the types of things it's looking for, that it's kicking out where there's something more advanced with an edit, or if there's something missing or conflicting, or for some reason, maybe it hasn't seen enough examples of something, and so it doesn't have the confidence level. And so then that will send that to a queue for a medical coder review.
So if I was a coder, and was looking at these kinds of things, I mean, that's kind of where I think their expansion could come, right? And kind of things like this, if they see that there's documentation elements missing, well, somebody needs to educate those providers. That's one thing the AI is not going to do, right? So, they could be moving more into those educational, and as you were pointing out already, Stacie, auditing, just like anything else, AI needs to be audited. It needs to be reviewed, so somebody's going to have to be doing those kinds of things. So I think from, the coding professional standpoint, they can kind of start shifting into, the kinds of things that they could do, and could find like just new areas where maybe they hadn't thought about, working in or doing things before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there will be new job opportunities for coders that haven't existed. I mean, obviously, I've been working with Maverick as their subject matter expert, and any company who's doing this, they should have a subject matter expert in whatever specialty they're doing. If they're not, I would put a question mark around the quality of what they're doing. Betty, that you're a subject matter expert as well. So that's the first thing I would ask is, okay, who is your subject matter expert that you have been using to make this happen? There are coders that work behind the scenes as well, because it's not just all on the client. The coding company, whatever vendor you choose, we're also doing work with a team of coders, and we're doing training. So you can get jobs working for these software companies that are helping develop the technology. I think it's super exciting to be involved in that part of it there. Oh, yeah. And then, I always tell people, looking forward, I didn't get into this when I was answering earlier, but you need to start looking at expanding your skill sets and like learning more. Like, one thing I do agree with, if you only do one specialty and one specialty only, you probably should start expanding into other specialties, especially if you're in a specialty that can lend itself more easily to automation, where I think that you should get into other things like interventional radiology. Everybody knows that's kind of my space where I spend the most time. That is highly complex. I think that would take a very, very, very long time to get that where AI had the ability to code that. The simple stuff that's repetitive, biopsies, needle biopsies, stuff like that, sure, no problem. When you're getting into complex vascular, some of the more complex cardiology, I know you work in cardiology, that is going to take a lot more to train. So if you've been thinking about getting into another specialty, I think it's worth doing that. If you're a multi-specialty coder, which like hospital coders are, if you're an outpatient surgical coder, you see it all. And I think you're very well positioned because you have all those. But if you are in a very small niche and you only have that one specialty skill set, now is the time to start looking at other skill sets. Think about other things that you want to branch out into. And again, look at other, revenue cycle roles. We've talked about documentation improvement. That's going to be huge. And then you'll have people that'll focus, maybe like denial, management specialists, that type of thing. Coders are perfect for that. Because even with AI, we all know payers are still going to deny a bunch of stuff. That's never going to go away. And so the medical coders have expertise, to be involved in that process. So again, the role is going to change, but it's just expanding the skills and learn more about anatomy and physiology. For example, I tell coders, like, get more clinical knowledge, because if you can gain more clinical knowledge, you can apply that in so many different, roles and look at, different things to do. So again, in the short term, I don't see a lot of changes, but I think people should start thinking, especially if you're going to be in the profession. Like I said, hopefully I'll be done in 10 years. It's my goal. I want to be done in 10 years and retired. But if you're planning on staying longer, you really have to think about the long-term plan and then what other skills that you can develop so then you can keep moving along and progressing in the future. Yeah.
And then Brad, Ariana had asked a question earlier that kind of was going to lead me into my question about, implementation for you, so specific to the company, does Maverick partner with universities?
As in like academic medical centers?
I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, from a customer perspective, I mean, we want to work with any organization that is looking to automate coding, and they have the historical data that we can use to train. I mean, the way that a lot of coding companies work now is that they start in one specialty and then they partner with another specialty and get the data and refine the model and then move into a different specialty, because each of these specialties obviously are different from a coding perspective and documentation perspective. So, universities, academic medical centers are really good partners because they have such, large amounts of historical data. And they're also, they're universities, right? So they're it's part of the educational process there. And so I think it's a good match.
And so on that venue, when you partner with someplace, like what kind of things are necessary for you to get the AI implemented into, the facility, into the organization?
I think we've kind of touched on some of those, but I think, understanding, I always talk about understanding the technology ecosystem of your organization, because you don't want to plug in AI into a workflow that's broken, or if you plug AI in, is it going to break something upstream or downstream? There's a lot of complexity to that. And I think organizations should be thoughtful about where they're automating and what processes are going to be impacted by that. Getting clinical documentation improvement efforts in place as early as possible. Because I saw someone had mentioned, well, what if, they got poor historical data for 2 years? That's a challenge that we have to work through. And it's something that is part of our discussions up front about the quality of the data historically. And then it's about, okay, well, we may not be ready to implement technology like this right now. We need to get our ducks in a row from that perspective. And I think the other thing is communicating early and often with your teams about the technology and about AI, dispelling myths like, oh, this is going to take my job, or, oh, this is just going to automate a task and it's going to be non-compliant. The computers are taking over. I think organizations that have a good culture of communication about what they're trying to do and solving a problem with technology, I think the earlier you do that with your team, I just think it prepares them to be successful, because they're going to be stakeholders in the technology and the outcomes of the technology and the efficiencies. So they should be educated and understand it, especially when some of the stuff is a little kind of newish and cutting edge and maybe a little scary if you don't really understand it. I think it's important to have that communication with your staff.
Yeah, coders should be excited, because the way I see this is it takes away that tedious, repetitive stuff that you don't need to spend time on. You can spend your time doing other things. Me personally, being a production coder for diagnostic radiology, I couldn't sit and do that for 40 hours a week. And I know there are people who love doing that. I'm like, that is not for me. I'm the auditor, I'm the educator, and I like doing this piece of it, because you get to have, some say in training the model. which is kind of like, I love the R&D team with Maverick is like amazing. And the head of it, he makes me laugh. He goes, whatever you say, Stacie, we take as fact. It is like, what does he say? Absolute truth. And I go, why can't other people feel that way about me when I say something? Like,
if only, right? Yeah, and here Angela Jordan, hey Angela, said she loves working in AI, seeing how it can benefit clinicians, coding, and compliance professionals. So yeah, I think it's pretty exciting, and I think that the whole having y'all on here and helping that, it's not ChatGPT, because you hear people make jokes about how bad ChatGPT can be. I have put in a new CPT code in there and asked it to explain it to me, and it just made something up. So it was, I mean, that's not what we're doing here. And how, it kind of integrates in and what it can help do, and that, it's not going to put you out of a job, that, it just kind of opens up, I think, more avenues for coding professionals to kind of expand, because we are, Stacie, like you said, we're forever learners. You can't be in this profession and say, well, I got in 20 years ago, and that's the last time I went to a course or a seminar or a webinar. Can you imagine talking to somebody that would say that? You would be like, yeah, I am not listening to a word you say, because it's just, you just can't do that. So we, I think by nature, are wanting, like what's new and what's going on now and what else can I learn and who's doing what. And, so I think this is like a perfect thing for people in this area of the healthcare field to kind of embrace and get into, because it could just expand a whole lot of stuff that, may open new opportunities, for them to keep them kind of on their toes and with what's going on.
I actually think in this short term, it may increase coding jobs, which sounds kind of weird, but the AI has to be monitored. It has to be developed and it has to be monitored, especially in the early stages. Because again, it's going to learn from the human coders. That is all the data we give it, that is data that came from humans coding those encounters, humans creating the documentation and the encounters. So that's the first, level of learning. And then from there, it just gets incrementally better. So again, that I just see those opportunities opening up with companies like Maverick. So I would encourage those of you who have the subject matter expertise, look for those jobs with those software vendors, and expand into that, because I know they're looking for good people. I know Maverick will be expanding into multi-specialty. They'll be looking for good people. So if you have that higher level, and I know a lot of SMEs myself, then I would encourage you to maybe look in those avenues and pursue those opportunities.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, before because we're a little over time, but I know we started a few minutes late, so I've got one more really good question, I think, here, and then I would like to have y'all's final thoughts, because I don't want to hold you up longer. I really appreciate your time. I think this is fascinating. So Catherine Rose has a great question there. How do you recommend a coder would get familiar with how to work with AI if they haven't been exposed to it, to help them stay ahead? Do y'all have any advice for, like how they can get exposure to it?
So as far as, a coder, how the coder workflow really won't be much different than CAC. If, I were to pull up Maverick's platform right now and show you, you'd be like, oh, it's like CAC, but the user interface just looks a little bit different. So as far as the daily workflow of anybody doing coding or auditing in one of those applications, that pretty much is going to be the same. That's not going to change. What I would encourage people to do is just learn more about the technology in general, because that was like a learning curve for me. It's like, I understand the coding piece and I'm over here working in the application, but sometimes talking to the R&D team and some of the terminology that they're talking about, I'm like, you're speaking a foreign language to me. It's like me talking code to them, and I need to translate for them, and they need to translate for me, what they're talking about with their technical terms. So we teach each other. So I think because so much gets thrown at you about AI, and you have all these different terms that you hear, and, like I said, Brad did a great job on touching on some of the basic terminology with great explanations. I think if you understand the technology and the more you learn about that, and you can Google it and ask ChatGPT questions. That is a great use of ChatGPT. You can get a free account. You can ask ChatGPT a question, and it will write you a nice little summary of any question you have. And I got to say, when it comes to the technology space, it's pretty darn accurate. with what it gives you. Because I'm like, how do I express this thought about deep learning in a simple manner, or machine learning? ChatGPT, I go to it, I'm like, perfect, ChatGPT, thank you very much for that suggestion. Now I understand it and I can explain it to other people. So
good. And then Catherine said that that was great advice, so she thanks you for that. So yeah, so in leaving off for today, because I am running out of time. I don't want to keep y'all too much overtime. I so appreciate y'all being here. Are there any final things that, you know, Brad and then Stacie, that you would want to like tell people to kind of look for, or to be proactive to do, or just in general about AI?
I think it goes kind of back to what Stacie was talking about, just your jobs and where the coder sits. And we use the term human in the loop all the time. There used to be this idea that AI would be black box and it would do its magic. And then on the back end, we just be like, oh, okay, so that's what it's doing. But really, it's keeping a human in the loop and making sure that the AI is not, you know, there's a term called hallucinating, and they use it sometimes with AI when it starts talking and then it just goes off the rails and makes absolutely no sense. We haven't had that in this space, thank goodness, but it happens where it's called hallucination. So it's very important that, you know, the human element is still part of it. And we're way off from any place where a coder or an autonomous coding platform would do 100% of the codes. And then the second point that I wanted to make was just, and it goes back to, I think, Catherine's point, learning about the technology, but also being curious in your organization about the workflow. Because again, that goes back to like, where am I going to add value? And if I understand the workflow of my organization, then when they do deploy AI, I can say, okay, well, that's going to be a problem over here because we haven't fixed this. And so I just think it gives you it elevates you to more of a strategic kind of advisor within the organization. So.
That's a great pointer. I really like that, Brad. Yeah. Stacie?
So we actually do have a little bit of AI hallucination with the software. So maybe this is something that I'll teach like Brad about. Not to the degree that you were talking about where it goes completely off the rails, but I learned, and that was a term I learned from the R&D team. Like one day we're having a conversation and it's like, where's this code? Like someone's, I'm like, where's this code coming from? There's like nothing here that would support this code. It happens every once in a while. And they're like, oh, AI has hallucinations, and then it thinks it sees something there, and then it's like not there. So we do have that encoding, but not the crazy path that it would go down and destroy the earth or anything like that. But it's kind of, in a way, CAC does the same thing, where sometimes you look at CAC, and even though it's done on NLP, sometimes you're still like, I kind of don't know how it arrived at this code. So that can still happen. And again, and it's one of those things you kind of don't know, because you don't know how it arrived there, but then you just retrain it. You identify, oh, it's consistently doing this. So now we correct it, you retrain it, and then you have the ability to eliminate it if you do run into something like that. But it does happen. And again, that's why AI has to be monitored. You know, even if a client, you know, is with us and they're 85% direct to bill, they should be auditing, you know, just like you always should have been auditing. I am shocked at the number of providers who don't do regular audits, who probably are as well, because you do a lot of auditing, Betty, and you know, some might do once a year. I'm like, yeah, that's better than nothing, but you probably should do it more frequently. So I tell everybody, ramp up your auditing. If you haven't been auditing, start doing it. Do it on a quarterly basis. Get that documentation improved. Otherwise, you're really just changing your workflow. You're not really going to benefit from all of the advantages of the technology if you don't have all your ducks in a row in those areas.
That's great advice. All right, y'all. So if you want to check out Stacie, you know, follow her, hook up with her on LinkedIn. Here is her LinkedIn profile. We will copy it and put it in the chat. And for Brad, here is his LinkedIn profile. So you can hook up with Brad. And if you want to go to their company websites, Brad, again, is with Maverick Medical. So there's where you can get on to check out Maverick Medical. And then Stacie, of course, is the owner of RadRx. So you can check her out there. Again, y'all, seriously, I'm so glad that you came on and really thankful because I think this is like just a really great topic, especially now that we're seeing it creeping in all over with the EHRs and they're bringing it up more and more. I just read something on one of the EHRs where they're putting it into the templates to help guide the physicians and, into their documentation and coding and things like that. So it's definitely something that we're going to be seeing it's not going away. So, we all have to get used to it and figure out how to use it and, what we're going to do about it. So I really appreciate y'all coming on. And this might be something, as I said, in the future, just come back on and, have another round with people because we had some really good questions, I think, today. So I
would like to real quickly, we didn't give you the link, but the Maverick Medical AI LinkedIn page, you just can search Maverick Medical AI. Go follow the Maverick page. And on Friday, tomorrow, there will be a blog post by me about the differences between CAC and autonomous coding. So go follow the Maverick Medical AI page, and then you'll be able to see that tomorrow. So got to get that in.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And what I'll do is after I will go back and I'll put the Maverick Medical's LinkedIn profile. I'll put the link into the stuff for people to go look at later. But thanks for pushing that in there. So again, thanks, y'all. And I hope everybody has a happy Halloween. And we will see you next time when we can go through. I think my next guest is going to be Lady Martinez. So we're going to talk about the new GI codes because Lady is a GI guru. So make sure you check us out and join us for that. So we will see you next time. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.